you know, program management, and kind of setting up what does this new project look like. It could be helping the development of other people on my team, and, you know, kind of thinking about what does career development look like. So it really is a whole host of different things. But what I will say in my experience, the skills that I'm using every single day are very, very similar to those ones that I was using when I was in the lab working.
I'll echo Laura in that every day is different. It's always so variable, but one thing that doesn't change is the number of meetings that we get pulled into. I say we, I'm sure everyone here is always in some kind of meeting or rescheduling meetings. But my primary role on the BD team is to make sure that all of the activities are on track for anything that's not related to China business. So based on our business model, you know, we still have a lot of partnerships going on, and a lot of projects that, you know, we want to get started in Japan, in the US, in terms of clinical trials and everything that goes along with that. Can I continue? Okay, so I work directly with the CEO and the president. So the things that I see are very, very high level. And then trying to coordinate all of those pieces with the internal team, and then if needed, external too. And so all of those tasks are very different, right? So for internal, we got to make sure that we have all of our documentation in order. What's the latest version for that trial? Is everything up to date? With external, depending on how far the partnership is, you know, it could be as simple as let's do some due diligence. Who is this person that we're talking to, and where else have they worked? If we're talking to them about an oncology drug, you know, what other drugs have they worked on? You know, what type of things could come up in our conversation about our particular molecule that they're interested in. So in that way, in trying to like fit all the puzzle pieces and anticipate where the discussion could go, I think that's what my PhD helps me out a lot with, because you could have a lot of experience in the field, like working your way up in one particular area or one particular pharmaceutical company, but sometimes that limits you to just one disease area, right? And so when you want to broaden and your career, at least like what I did, it's good to have the right technical skills to know how much knowledge is enough, if that makes sense.
Great, and I think just to I think there's a really cool trend. I know there's only two people, but as far as with Mary and Laura, just kind of showing that with communication is a really big part. And I think that's one of the aspects that I work in as a scientist is a lot of communication, not only within our research and development, but also it's kind of, I'm right at the intersection between R&D, engineering, and clinical. And more recently, I kind of have seen that role expand to more regulatory actually, and submitting some of our submissions, but now also into project management, which is something I never envisioned at the very beginning. I think that's really cool and exciting. And I think at least at Cynosure, and I'm sure they do that at other companies too, is kind of expanding on the role and seeing which directions do you want to test and pressure test to see where do you see yourself going. And especially when you have that growth type of mindset, I think that's important. As far as my day-to-day, I think right now I'm thankful to be, working from home, but also going into the office to do some of our clinical studies. That's one of my main responsibilities in kind of designing clinical studies when we want to evaluate these devices. We do a lot of concept development, testing, and we can do some modeling. But at the end of the day, if we develop a device that's just not tolerable by someone, it's too much energy, it's too much heat, or it doesn't feel well, then it can die right there. We need to make some type of modification. So there's a lot of that kind of clinical studies that we drive. And again, it's collaboration between our clinical group, our research group, engineering, and being able to communicate and talk amongst all those different languages. and to kind of say, what's the issue, what's the problem, especially if you're trying to drive towards a solution that higher management or the company is aiming for. So kind of, if you have an idea, at least from my perspective, of having an idea of what drives you, and if you have that understanding, I think that can really make you feel as an integral part of the company. Whether you're in research and development, you're in regulatory, or you're driving a lot of communications externally with other collaborators. So.
All right, I think a really interesting thing all of you kind of mentioned in your discussion here, in your answer here, is it feels like you are involved in a lot of various things. Like your role is just the title, but you're involved in a number of really critical decisions and working with a lot of various teams and things like that. I'm curious, is that one of like the big distinguishing factors you see between kind of the academic world and the industry world, and how you can perhaps compare that, or how do you feel about what it sounds like wearing a lot of hats? So Oscar, do you want to start this time?
Sure, thanks, Gwen. I think that's a really good question. I think so going in grad school and going through that PhD route, I think it's something that I always felt that I had to do by myself, where you're driving all the studies and you kind of get this feedback from your advisor, and obviously you have all of your lab mates that are kind of critiquing your work or trying to help you, and it's definitely something that you cannot do alone. But it's, I think definitely switching over to industry, you kind of get that it's at a much faster paced scale, and the stakes can be a little bit higher, right, depending on where you're at. So understanding that demand and seeing what that transition looks like, I think for me has been really important in trying to gauge, which different paths are you planning to go in. But I think that's kind of like one of the main differences that I've seen between academics and industry.
Laura, Mary, do you want to chime in? Can the two of you hear me?
Sure.
Laura, Mary? Okay, sorry. I wasn't sure if it was going through.
Yeah, I echo all of that. And I think, for me, one of the biggest differences that I see between academia and industry really is I have significantly more kind of creative and intellectual freedom in industry compared to academia. Whereas in academia, you really focus in on your one speciality. This is your topic. This is what you know everything about. For me, that was knowing absolutely everything about ECM models and how to recreate microenvironments. Whereas moving into industry, you've got to learn how to think bigger than that and learn how to become, not a specialist, but kind of a general resource in all of these different areas. So for me, that is the biggest difference, but also that's where a lot of my enjoyment really comes from. I was surprised making the transition, just because I think a lot of the conversation around, moving out of an academic role into an industrial role is that, you're not going to have a lot of that intellectual kind of research ability that you had before. You're not going to be able to work on like cutting edge technology or studies, and that's really not true. In some senses, you actually have more freedom to explore because of, these larger companies have resource behind them. They have money and funding that academics just simply doesn't have. So for me, that was kind of the most surprising difference. But it's been a very pleasant surprise.
So I'll take a different approach in answering this question. I think with my role currently and my other roles, and having a little bit more freedom and wearing a lot of hats has definitely been my own choice. I mean, I actively looked for roles where I thought that I could grow and that I could take on a lot of responsibility. And maybe that has to do with my personality, maybe that has to do with my experience as a PhD, but I felt like if I wasn't challenged, I wasn't motivated. If there wasn't, and not to say like every day I'm burning fires, that's not the case at all. But I think you all understand. I see a lot of nods here. So trying to find that can be really difficult. Like that's not always clear in job descriptions. And and I've seen a lot of articles lately about, when job postings use this type of language, this is what you should look out for, or this is actually a red flag for what this means. I don't think that applies to the scientific community at all. And it's really hard to know what the role is from reading a description. So you really got to take those interviews, even if you may think like 50% of the description isn't really that interesting, just take it, because those one or two things that you're actually really, really interested in could be the thing that, gets you up every day, because I'm sure all of us agree that there's not something that we love to do every single day. But that's just part of the job. Yeah, I don't think I have anything more to say about that.
Yeah, that actually leads me into a really, I think, an interesting question for everybody here. Is all of your roles sound very exciting. Now, how did you actually land the job that you currently have? And how did you kind of pivot from your previous role into this current role? So, Mary, do you want to start here?
Yeah. So this role, I got reached out by a recruiter. So this has been the first time that a recruiter has reached out to me for a role that I actually wanted to apply for. I think that for those of you who are actively job searching, you may see this is true. There's not a lot of seasoned technical recruiters out there. I mean, I have a PhD, and I was getting applications for something that was, required a high school degree. Or I was still getting applications for R&D bench work when I haven't touched a pipette since like 2013. So take all of that with a grain of salt, because this recruiter found me and it ended up being a really great fit. And what I said earlier about, initially the role didn't really sound that great, but, I needed to brush up on my interview skills, and it was something that I was kind of interested in. But when I learned more about it, I was really, really excited. And in that role, or in the interview, it was the first interview that I was offered the job on the phone. So it all worked out.
That's a really wonderful story, and I agree with you. Working with a recruiter can be pretty good, but it can be very frustrating at times, depending on what it is you're looking for, and how well your message is understood by the recruiter. I've had multiple conversations with recruiters, and it was hard to kind of align what I was looking for versus what they had open. So yeah, I totally get that. All right, Mary, I'm sorry, Oscar or Laura, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, sure. I guess I'm in a slightly different position, that this is my fourth job, I think, since my PhD. So I've been through a lot of different roles since then. Everything from consulting to, program managing. But I will say the one thing that is a commonality across all of those roles: networking, network, people. Every role that I have had, I have been either referred in by someone who works there, or, they've mentioned my name in the right room at the right time. And so that's really invaluable. My current role, I was really lucky that I was working with a woman through some nonprofit work that I do. Just slowly over time, she became one of my mentors. And, she really challenged me to think about the role that I was doing at the time, which was program management, and whether that's really where I wanted to be. And is that really what made me want to get out of bed in the morning and go to work? And with her guidance, we put together what does 6 months look like? What does a year look like? And then once we kind of had that discussion, she happened to be in a room where they were looking for a person who wanted to do the work I wanted to do. And, she just sponsored me and put my name in kind of the hat there. And that's how I ended up doing the role I'm doing now, and I love what I do because of it. So I'd say it's never a bad thing to go out and network, even if you hate it. You know, a lot of it is about who you know and actually becoming aware of some of these opportunities, because, you know, not all jobs are advertised on, you know, LinkedIn. Recruiters aren't always going to reach out to you for like your perfect job. So if you have a good idea of what you want to do, then, you know, going out and talking to people in similar careers or just getting to know other people in that industry is really, really powerful.
Awesome. And I'll kind of add on to your previous question, Quinn, about like what's the difference to transition from academia to industry, just very briefly. But I think one of the big things was, if you didn't already while you were in grad school, as you were trying to do your presentation and do your defense, I think really is owning your knowledge, owning what you know, how you're presenting it, and providing a path forward, right? So that I think is very critical. I think in one of the first presentations that I did in industry, I had presented some data, was collecting some data, and showed, you know, this is what we need to do next. And there was kind of like, all right, this is what we're doing next. And I was like, wait, there aren't any major questions. Are you sure you don't want to, you know, grill me on this? And that's what I was used to in grad school. But I think that helps to prepare for it, right? There's all of that kind of doubt and challenges that you're getting, but at the same point, it helps to, I think if you connect it back, it helps to kind of build up your character and to make sure that you have that confidence and ownership that you need, especially in industry. To answer your current question, as far as, you know, kind of the path here, 100% agree with Laura. I'm sure Mary would echo the same thing, is looking at networking. And that's, you know, how I was telling that first part about Vanderbilt. That was my mentor in undergrad. I had never even heard about that, but he was saying, you know, Dr. Thomas Milner, he said, you should go to Vanderbilt to go to do your PhD. And I was like, where's Vanderbilt at? I've never heard of that. And so he connected me with faculty at Vanderbilt University and said, you should go there for grad school. Got the opportunity to go in there, go and interview, did grad school there. Lo and behold, as I was looking for opportunities, I was applying everywhere, let him know that I was searching for an opportunity. And he said, oh, I think they're looking for a scientist at Cynosure. Let me let the VP of R&D know. I said, great. He sent a little quick email, and he forwarded me the email from the VP of R&D, my current boss, and he said, yeah, let's invite him to Boston for an interview. So it was so quick. I had been searching and applying for so many opportunities, and this was within a week, and I got a phone call. The first question they asked me is, why do you want to move to Boston? It's so cold over here. But I think from there, it was a really great opportunity and important to keep in touch, not just when you need things, but obviously that's part of your mentorship, right? That's even today. I think when I first transitioned to this opportunity, I thought, I guess I'm done with mentors. I guess that's it. I know where I'm at, but it's so important to identify your mentors. And there's different areas of life as well that you're looking at. But yep, that's how I've landed where I'm at right now.
So I also have a random networking story too, and my boss is on here, and I don't know if he's heard this story yet. But how I got to my current job was also really through networking and quite a bit of luck, honestly. So I had been searching for a job for pretty much about a year, and I happened to go to a Seattle startup meeting, and I sat next to somebody in a panel, and this person, his startup was doing some kind of board game. Anyways, we got to chatting. I gave him my business card just to kind of connect and network and stuff like that. And he met somebody who was more in the life science area, he passed along my business card. I met this person. They just talked to my boss, who he knew was looking for somebody, and then that connection was made, and I got my job. So networking is really powerful. But I know for a lot of scientists, and for me at the beginning too, that was difficult. Just because I think in the academic world, you know, there's just you're trying to handle quite a bit, and you're constantly busy, whether it's with your experiments or just, you know, catching up on the literature. It's a lot of work. And so there's not a lot of time to kind of learn networking and how to do that. So I just want to see what perhaps, you know, the three of you, what are your kind of top tips for networking or how to get started? Would be a good thing to know, I think, for everybody.
I can start because I think that I don't know anyone who like loves networking. Most of my career outside of academia hasn't been BD, so that is a lot of face-to-face, that is a lot of networking. But I had to shift my perspective of like job, and when I was first trying to transition, like it's not about trying to find that internship, it's not about trying to find the right person, it's just about going out there and like, especially if you hate doing it and it gives you a lot of anxiety, it's practice. Because whether or not you stay in academia or you transition to do anything else, like you're going to have to talk to people and just practice. So also, you know, when I have gone to networking and I've met people and I can tell it's like probably their first or second networking event. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but it's so obvious, you know, because they're just like, you know, tell me all about you. Like, how did you get this job? And what should I do? And it's a lot, you know. Most of these are after work. So you just, and there's wine and there's beer and there's food. So you should be relaxed and just, you know, really just take it as an opportunity to talk to people and also figure out like what your personality is after work. Like, what is your personality kind of at work too? Because this is how people will know you and that's how they'll refer you, right? Because if they see you as obviously you're going to be bright, you're all bright. But you also have to be someone that someone wants to work with. And so I think that's really important. And that also comes with the types of questions that you ask. You know, I know that, and I've made the mistake of this too, of asking like really off questions at first, just because you just don't know, right? Like when you're doing research, you tend to find stories that are like the nightmare stories of transitioning, of like, you know, going to that one company who is, you know, working you 100 hours a week and this is not what you wanted, or no one is, you know, respecting your intelligence as a PhD. So I can definitely understand that that can be a little bit scary and discouraging. But I'm here to tell you that those people don't go to networking events. So, so you'll definitely be fine. Another thing is the type of events that you go to. So once events start opening up, I know for me, the ones that were always the most productive were ones that had panels like this, so that afterwards you could, you know, talk to the panelists. Ones that were hosted by STEM groups like Women in Bio, American Association of Women. I'm in San Diego, so there's always tons of groups going on, or I'm sorry, tons of events going on by several different groups. So I think that benefited me a lot to be in a very strong, collaborative scientific community.
Yeah, just to kind of build on that, you know, I think you mentioned Women in Bio, AUS. They're two groups that I'm really heavily involved in, and like I will self-declare I do not like networking. I'm one of those people that just it's not for me, but it's really, really important. So, you know, for me, a route to networking was becoming involved in those organizations that do have a lot of the people in them who are very influential within, you know, the industry you want to move into. You know, volunteering through Women in Bio is actually how I met Quinn. And, you know, it's also how I met all of the people who have been the very strong mentors in my current career. So, you know, if going to an event like after work feels like too much of a barrier, you know, there are ways that you can network without even really realizing you're networking. You know, go and volunteer one of the skills you have. You know, you just happen to be good at like writing great tweets, go and volunteer your time as like a social media manager for one of these organizations, and then you'll get to know people organically. And you know, that's so much more powerful than, you know, like Mary said, you know, going up to people and asking them like their life story about their career and how they landed a job, because of, you know, it takes kind of real connection to kind of build that network around you of support and people who are going to say your name in the room when they need to. So, you know, I would encourage people to go and do that.
I 100% agree with Mary as far as for practice, practice, practice. Go out there and don't be afraid to make mistakes. I was at a career fair. This was actually for grad school, so there was tons of representatives, and we're sitting at tables, a large conference room. You're trying to do a quick meet and greet, and I sat to one, I think, dean of admissions, and he's like, "Oh, I'm also a professor at USC," and I said, "Oh, great!" I was like, "I love." All the the palm trees. It's beautiful over there. I would love to go to California. He's like, oh, this is University of South Carolina. So it kind of it shocked me. I was like, oh, I should have asked that beforehand, maybe just to clarify. But I think it's kind of going out there. You have a set of questions, or you're just trying to practice it. I think what might help, at least what helped me, was really kind of going through and practicing what's your elevator pitch, right? Who are you? What are you trying to potentially accomplish? If someone, it's a very easy question that I've gotten asked so many times when I meet people, whether it's through networking or whether it's just a casual conversation. Tell me a little bit about yourself, right? That's usually one of those first questions, if not later on as part of the interview. Very easy, very easy response that you can kind of get through and practice different time points, so that maybe you have 15 seconds, maybe you have 30 seconds, maybe you have a minute, and you extend and you mold it depending on what your feedback you're getting. I think the other major part is also practicing informational interviews. For me, that was really important for getting me where I'm at today. And it was as exactly what you were saying, Quinn, is you don't have time for this. You're trying to finish writing up your dissertation. You're trying to set up a Zoom to figure out who's going to be invited to your defense and fill out all the paperwork. When do you fit in trying to find a job, right? And so this is like the last things you're doing. I'm helping one of my colleagues right now at Vanderbilt, trying to figure that stuff out. He's like, Oscar, I'm writing my dissertation. How do I find time for this? And really it's reaching out to your network where you have, maybe it's through connections on LinkedIn saying, hey, I saw we both went to UT Austin in undergrad. You studied biomedical engineering, you studied engineering. I see that you're at company X. Like, that would be really awesome. Can you tell me a little bit more? Do you have 15 minutes for a discussion? Something very to the point. That's what I found has been super helpful for me as a quick example to see. And you might get a lot of, you might get no responses, but at least you might get a couple of them where I've made connections on that for people I didn't know, but it was through, we were both alumni from a university or part of an organization, which I think is really helpful. The other little tidbit is actually I connected with my career services at Vanderbilt, and they showed me how to use LinkedIn and how to figure out who's, the people that you're connecting with and what kind of connections you have and who to reach out to. So I think that was I took a lot of those different paths to figure out what I wanted to do. And once you get to that interview stage, how do you figure out and ask the right questions? How do you find your right job? Salary, things like that. So it's all important.
So we have a really good question from the group here is kind of, so we're talking about networking here, but of course in the current COVID situation, everything is kind of at a standstill and there's not a lot of face-to-face interactions. What are some of your advice on how to do networking at this moment and how to really delve in and create those connections when they are kind of hard in the current times?
I think Laura made a really great suggestion about volunteering your time to organizations like Women in Bio. I mean, regardless of pandemic or not, that's always a great idea. And I really think that would probably be the best way, because, jumping in, I'm assuming that this question came from someone who is new to networking or, never been to a networking event before. I don't know how well these virtual networking events happen or are productive, but I honestly don't think that they're as productive as in person. So I wouldn't recommend that, if you see I've seen them advertised as like matchmaking because it's like speed networking, and if that's like your first exposure, don't do it because then you'll never want to network ever again. So find organizations that are looking for volunteers. I mean, Women in Bio is great, but I can't think of any off the top of my head other than that, just because the one in Southern California is such a great group. Maybe we can come up with a list to send out to you afterwards. But I think that would be that's like the best advice that I could give. I have had a couple people reach out to me directly on LinkedIn, and their request was very, very authentic, and that they just wanted to learn about my career. And I've answered those, and we've had Zoom calls from that too. And like, I really have never met this person before, so there's always that.
Yeah. I'll say it, exactly the same. I have been to a couple of these networking events. And Mary's right, especially if you're new to networking, depending on kind of the level of organization of those events, it's probably not a great first experience. So finding a way that you can more authentically interact with people would be my recommendation. Reach out on LinkedIn. I've had quite a few people reach out, and we've set up kind of like virtual coffee. OWASA people are always willing to help you, providing it is authentic. And, a little bit like Oscar said, if you don't get a response, that happens. But that's not usually because, they don't want to talk to you. It's usually because they just haven't seen it or they haven't had the time at that point. So, people are willing to help. The other thing I'd recommend is go look on Twitter for people who are in the kind of the careers that you're thinking about, or people who work in the research areas that you're in. Twitter has a really, really strong PhD community, and there's a lot of networking that happens all the time through Twitter. Like, a lot of people get referrals to jobs through Twitter and, the groups that they're in there. So, whilst we're all virtual, that is an option, especially if you find kind of the face-to-face interaction a little bit more daunting.
Just to add on to Laura and Mary's comments as well, I think I'm finding myself, maybe other people as well, as kind of connecting back with some old friends that I've had now that maybe it's, because of that distance barrier, we don't usually catch up. But now it's like, hey, let's connect on Zoom. Like, why haven't we been hanging out for a long time? And, old friends from college or grad school, or even back from your hometown. So I think that has been, it's like you kind of catch up and you find out, hey, wait, you completely made this transition to a different career. How did you get there? And so maybe it's not so much that, again, like I think Laura and Mary were mentioning, it's just, I'm looking for a job, but it's more of, how did you get that opportunity? Let me learn your path, your story about that. And sometimes that can kind of lead, okay, maybe it's things that you can kind of tweak in your approach, but maybe there might be some type of, hidden opportunity that kind of comes up and says, hey, I know someone that's actually looking at it. Sometimes, at least in my experience, I found that actually works a little bit better, rather than saying like, hey, do you know of a job at your company? And sometimes you have to ask very straightforward because you're trying to get to your point and time is of the essence, but kind of going that back route and learning their story, taking the time, I think can kind of put that in the back of their mind as well, and let you know if there's any other connections.
I just want to quickly echo what Oscar said, is not to forget about the current network that you have that exists. While probably a lot of your network is in academia, they might have connections to other people in industry. I was connected with somebody who was taking a new job in Seattle and wanted to learn a little bit more, and that connection was through a friend of mine who is a professor. So she connected me with this person who's in more of an industry perspective. But yeah, just don't forget that academic connection still exists, and it still can bridge you between academia and industry. It's not all about throwing yourself basically kind of in the academic in the industry world. There's a lot of connections that you might not see at the beginning. All right. So I kind of want to go back to maybe a little bit of a beginning and just kind of get a sense for you here. So we're all talking about this transition, right? So my question is, how and why did you decide to make this transition? So who wants to go first?
I can go. So my grad school experience, I did my undergrad in Minnesota, and I loved research. Like, I loved being in the lab, even if it was just like plating an ELISA. Like, I took full ownership of that, and I just thought it was like the coolest thing. I think in like my junior year, I worked with Laura Suggs, and she ended up transitioning to Austin. And she was the first person to even plant that seed in my head about grad school. So Minnesota has a very strong med device community. So, not a lot of people talked about grad school. But, I followed her lead and I ended up I followed her down to Texas. I got my PhD from her. So in between my undergrad and grad school, I went to Vietnam to teach English. And I love that experience. And so I kind of entered grad school thinking that I wanted to teach. Come to like my first TA session, like second week, I was like, nope, don't want to teach. So I understand that some people still want to continue the academic route without, having a love or passion for teaching. But to me, that didn't sound fair. So then I just started thinking about what I wanted to do, and it was really stressful and it was really disappointing. You work so hard to get into grad school, and by that time you're already, into your thesis project, and now you're like, for what? Because I think there's still a lot of stigmatism about transitioning with a PhD. So I just I looked up as many articles as I could about like what you can do with a PhD, and at the time there wasn't that many. Like honestly, there was the same 5 that I just kept on rereading, and they were all on AAAS. Times have changed, thankfully, and that's this transition is a lot more common. But the roles, I guess, that connected with me most was somehow having an intersection between the research and the patient. And that's really, really broad, but, at least it narrowed it down for me to like science policy and business development, because with the business side, I really love the partnership aspect. Once you dig deeper into how a patient gets a vaccine or a drug or a med device, like it's super, super expensive, and unless you're a big pharma, you can't do that by yourself. So how can small companies work with larger companies to make that partnership, and I'm still really, I don't know, sometimes I say I'm naive because it's not about the money. It's not about these multi-billion dollar deals, even though I am in BD. I'm probably like the worst BD person to say this. But it's not about the money. It's about getting patients the best treatment. And then, what catapults that, it's really innovative technology that is actually available to people, So sorry, kind of on a tangent here. So what did I do? I basically took on any opportunity that was available. So at Austin, there was something called the Austin Technology Incubator, and it was operated outside of like the university's licensing group. So I worked there under the life science team, and I basically did due diligence on companies that wanted to commercialize their product. That was probably my first exposure to business development. From there, I did do a postdoc. That's how I got to San Diego, and that was more of a strategic move because I was having a very difficult time finding anything in Texas that I was remotely interested in industry. So my strategy was I'm going to do a postdoc in big biotech hubs. And it was a perfect fit in San Diego because my PI started her own company. And so she put me on projects that were very short term, knowing that I wasn't going to, be a professor. And there was no conflict there. Other postdoc interviews that I had, I couldn't even be honest with them, because they're like, well, why should we hire you if you're just going to go in industry? And this is from a very reputable group, which will not say their name, but very reputable. And even their technology had been spun out, and yet they still had that, thought. So that was kind of annoying. And so also, why would you want to work there? In general. So then postdoc, UCSD, 2 years. And then I took on a SBIR fellowship. So SBIR is Small Business Innovation Research. So any companies that apply to this federal grant and they get their phase 2, so phase 2 is over $1 million, they were automatically applied to be part of this program. And so this program gave people like myself with PhDs the opportunity to work in these small companies. And that was really great because small company is really, really exciting. You get to do so much and it's really fast paced. But with my salary coming from that fellowship, there was no risk of, losing my job the next day. And then from there, I did everything. I did everything that I wanted to do. I got to do the research part. I got to do marketing. I got to do BD, I got to do strategic alliance. And so in the year and a half that I was there, I figured out of those things what I wanted to do. And I tailored all of my resumes to those focuses. And then from there, I got a BD role at a clinical CRO. And then after that, I got a BD role at a digital pathology company. Not related to Quinn. And then now I'm with Huya Biosciences.
Mary, just a comment here. I love the story, your story, and how purpose you were and where you went and what skills and things you wanted to learn from that role. I love that. I love that purpose and that strategy that you had. And honestly, I feel like I wish I had that for myself. But I'm kind of learning on the job here and finding that. But I think overall that is an excellent strategy because even staying in academic, you had an idea what you wanted to go next and where you wanted to be and what you wanted to learn. Okay, yeah. So that's just my comment.
I think that comes naturally from I think all of us on the call who are just genuinely curious, right? Like that's essentially why we are on the path that we are on. And I was curious to know like what other people do outside academia. Like what else can I, not only what else can I do, but like what else can I do that is impactful, that I can like wake up every day and be super motivated. And also what was really important to me too is living in an area that I wanted to live in geographically. That was a big deal. I think times are changing now that a lot of biotech companies are kind of sprouting up everywhere, but I was applying to jobs because I was desperate in like middle of the nowhere, Florida, and I didn't want to live there. Like, what was I going to do? Where was I going to live? Like what was I going to do for fun? I was going to spend all day in the lab. And so those are things that you have to think about, or you don't have to. I mean, I understand that there may be responsibilities where you don't have the freedom to choose where you want to live geographically. But I think now that a lot of places are going to start opening up, it is really important if you have the privilege, I guess, to make those decisions.
Laura and Oscar, do you want to share your stories about why you transitioned? Laura, do you want to go first?
Sure, I can go first. I think my reasoning is actually going to be a little bit different to everyone else's. So before I even did my PhD, I knew I didn't want to be an academic. I 100% knew that I did not want to be an academic. I had been really lucky that I'd done some internships in the UK with kind of smaller sized biotech companies and with research institutes. And that really gave me an exposure to how much more there is outside of just the academic world. And a little bit like Mary said, how impactful you can be, in these different roles. So I kind of went into my PhD knowing that the academic track wasn't for me and I was never going to be a professor. That being said, once I completed my PhD, I also kind of took a strategic postdoc. I knew I wanted to move to the United States. I knew roughly what area I wanted to be working in, and that I was missing some of the skills to get me to kind of where I wanted to go in the kind of like program management regulatory space. So I took a postdoc that was looking at how you can take materials in the lab and actually commercialize them, and how you can actually take everyday research and get it out to patients and researchers and other groups. So for me that was always the driver there. and people ask, like, you've done a lot of different jobs. So I've done a lot of different roles so far, but for me, it's really just been following the kind of the thread of what is interesting to me. Like, am I still learning? Do I want to get up every day and do this job? And if not, what else can I learn, and how else can I use the skills that I've been building over this time in another way to be impactful? So that was always kind of the motivation for me. It was the motivation for doing the PhD, so I could learn more about the life science space, motivation for moving to the US. And then, eventually through my postdoc work, I was convinced I wanted to be a program manager. And I just happened to work on some pre-IND work. And it just felt like such a natural fit for me that I then started to pursue regulatory, just because of there was so much to learn there. There were so many skills I already had that really worked well in the regulatory space that it just kind of happened organically, to be completely honest. So I think, when you're thinking about leaving an academic role, whether you've decided you want to be a professor or you've decided that you don't, I think you should always take a kind of step back and, say, does this work feel meaningful to me? Is this fulfilling my personal goals? Does it make me happy? Does it fit with my life? Like, if you're going to be a professor, but you're going to have to live in an area that, you're not really sure how you'd live there, is that really worth it? So, it was taking stock of all of those questions for me that really solidified my decision. And, I'm really glad, because there were times, especially during my postdoc, that I thought, oh no, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I do want to be a professor. Maybe I do want to stay here. But, just having a really good idea of what's important to you. What do you enjoy doing? That really helps with that transition.
Awesome. And I'll kind of add in, as far as, I think maybe this aligns as well with the topic for the discussion, right? Exploring new paths. But I think kind of a little bit different from Laura and Mary is that I haven't fully detached myself from the teaching aspect of it. I think that was one of the main reasons when I was an undergrad at UT Austin, was looking at, I knew I loved research. I found that I really liked that, working in Dr. Milner's lab. And then it was also some of the really great professors that I had in electrical engineering had actually gone on and worked in industry. They had gone on to work in the semiconductor industry and get their experience. And they could really teach the material in ways that I could understand it, in ways that it was just reading the book, but it was framing the problem. What is the challenge that we're trying to solve, and putting it from that perspective. And that helped me understand it. So it was something that I had in the back of my mind. But as I was going through grad school and filling out, all my applications and your fellowship applications, one of the usual statements is, this is especially if you want to become a professor. And I was pretty certain, I knew I wanted to become a professor. And again, I haven't fully axed it out, but it was something that, and I really actually enjoyed some of the teaching assistants. Sorry, Mary, but I liked some of the aspects of that and trying to teach it. And there's a lot of challenges with it. And I felt like I learned a lot about myself from that. But it was, I think, for me, it was all of my classmates were going on and doing industry internships. Every summer, someone was working, whether it was, another organization, SHIP, the Society for Hispanic Professional Engineers, and trying to connect with so many different types of research industry opportunities. But I was working in the lab there at UT, or I did an internship at different places, but it was all very clinically or research focused. So again, very different. So by the time I got to, was in grad school, I just had this itch that I really needed to go test it out. I really wanted to go evaluate and see what is industry like for myself. I could hear it from a lot of different people. People will tell different stories, but until you go out there and pressure test that and see what it's like, and sometimes they even have opportunities during grad school where you can do an internship or 6-month, kind of co-op for that as well, which I think would be great. I unfortunately didn't do one, but I think it's a good way to kind of test the waters and see what it's like. And that's kind of helped me transition to where I am now in industry. And I've really enjoyed and learning so much about that fast-paced environment. But now it's kind of adjusted, as well as looking at it from, and this is based on my grad school kind of approach to solving problems, but is seeing, what is the clinical problem? What's the main consumer need that we're trying to address here? And that's what I found is, okay, I really enjoy that. I really trying to enjoy answering those questions and framing that as a challenge of how does this address both, research and development, engineering, clinical, and most importantly, tie back into the business needs, right? How is this going to propel forward, rather than just looking at it from, does this device work? So I think that's the aspect that I have.
Thanks, Oscar. So I think we have another interesting question here from the attendees. So the question is from Jessica, and she's asking if you have found advantages or disadvantage to taking the first job at either a small company or a bigger company, and do these two options provide a bigger door for future jobs and future opportunities?
I mean, I guess I can. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I guess I can start because I'm at one of the biggest companies, and I've also worked at very, very small, 5, 6 people companies too. I think it really depends on what you want and like what environment you work best in. For me, being at a large company has a lot of really good benefits. You get great healthcare, great paid time off. You have a lot more job security than working at some of these smaller businesses. But it also comes with, a lot of bureaucracy around being in a big organization and, HR and all of that other good stuff that comes with being in a much bigger business environment. But I will say for me, the goal was always to join one of these larger companies because of your opportunities for career development are huge. The larger the company you're at, the more avenues there are for you to kind of take and diversify your interests and your work. So you might come into a larger company, like a larger bioscience company, and be interested in, microscopy. But then you might be able to learn essentially on the job there that you're also interested in, project development, or maybe you're interested in business development. So I think the opportunities to explore are much, much greater at the large companies, but it does come with some of the drawbacks of, there's a lot of organizational structure in place there that kind of removes a little bit of the freedom, kind of day to day. So that's kind of my take on it.
I think it would depend a lot on your group and your manager. I always had the false assumption that at large, I wouldn't be happy at large pharma companies because work there is so restricted. Like you just don't have the freedom to do what you want to do or grow. But that's just simply not true. I know several people, at least in San Diego, who are at Takeda and Janssen, and they've been there for years and they love it. And they've continued to grow either within their research group, or like Laura said, they've been able to explore other areas within the company, and that's all supported. With small companies, I think that that opportunity is still there. If that is, if you have a good communication with your manager, right? If you were hired for a specific role, at small companies, they're going to expect you to do that 100% just because they just don't have any other resources for you to delegate that out to. But if the project is such where you can start to see how program development fits in, how BD fits in, and how you can be that person, I think that is a great opportunity for you to, make that proposal to your manager. I think, yeah, so I don't think there's disadvantages or advantages to either one. But I think that what is true wherever you go, you got to make sure that you trust your manager and you trust your colleagues, and that they'll always have your back.
Yeah, I would agree with Mary and Laura as far as, and my perspective on this is if there's a good opportunity, you have them outlined, you try to compare if you have 2 or 3, 5 or 6, or maybe you just only have one. But going in and the first part is making that decision, right? Taking that leap of faith and testing it out. Maybe you have a few discussions with people that work there at the specific company that you're looking at, just to kind of get some, a little bit of understanding of, what they're kind of like what we're doing today, right? A little bit of that informational interviewing, but going out there and just seeing if you like it. It's hard to say, small companies are a little bit more challenging to work with versus large companies. It really depends on how you function. And at the end of the day, how driven you are for that and what you want to get out of it. If your goal is to, I just want to find a place to go through 9 to 5, just complete my job and do that perspective, there's some places that fit well, and others, if you really want to grow and take more of that leadership responsibility and see yourself kind of, I really want to provide some direction into the organization, then there might be opportunities in both of those. But until you kind of test the waters for that, I think that's where you take that leap of faith and you find out, is this really for me? Do I like it here? How could I see myself growing?
All right, thanks everybody. So we're coming up at the end here. We're actually 3 minutes over. So I just want to quickly say thank you to everybody for attending, and a really, really big thank you here to Laura, Oscar, and Mary coming here to kind of answer our questions and share their experience. So with that, we'll kind of end it here. And if you have any additional questions or anything like that, please do feel free to kind of email me with them. I'll kind of touch base with Mary and Oscar here and Laura to kind of help answer additional questions if you have them later. And then you can also, I'm assuming it's going to be okay, chime in, Mary, Oscar, and Laura, if it's okay. But you can find all of us on LinkedIn, and I'll personally be very happy to connect with you.
Thank you, Quinn, for hosting. Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Quinn. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, of course. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for attending. We are going to set up probably another one of these sessions in the coming months. You'll receive additional information from me at that time. But again, thank you for everybody, and thank you to our panelists here. Have a good Wednesday, everybody.